there. Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Cox, and along with Randy Hansen and Bruce Showstack, we're the judges for this year's show. I just want to begin with a few introductory remarks. And judging is a very subjective process. It's not a horse race with a photo finish where everybody can agree. But I would really encourage you take the time to talk with people, to ask us questions, and take that back from the show. It's worth more than the ribbons. And another thing I would like to add is just a thank you for all the people who had the guts to enter. I'm sure you weren't thinking that you were going to pay money to have your piece publicly humiliated. That's not the goal here. And we picked mostly on ribbon winners, and the idea is to take good pieces and maybe think of ways that they could be even better, and to share that with everybody so that when you go to your next carving, you might take it up to the next level. And with that, we'll begin. This piece was in the relief carving category. It was done with 1 inch of material, and we thought they handled that 1 inch very well. If there's a weak area, this arm in here just became somewhat indistinct, whereas so much of the rest of it was easy to read. But we have another slide that will show how effective they were with just a minimal amount of material. And the way that they created perspective lines in their carving really created a lot of feeling of depth without using much depth. Really well done. In this relief carving, again, it was very thin, and they really got a lot of depth out of that piece. With relief carving, you want to use whatever opportunity you can to bring the background forward to be able to create more depth into the piece. If there was any weakness, it was just in the area circled. Just the beard is very close to the mouth, and it gives a bit of the feel that the beard might be in his mouth. That's a minor thing, but we felt that that could have been just pushed back a bit and create a little bit more distinction. And this is also in the relief category. Sometimes it's very difficult to have a decision about where a piece should be. And some pieces are very much in the round, some pieces are clearly in their categories. This is, okay. And this is in the relief category, and some of the strength of it, there's little fine lines around the eyes that really help create a strong character. Even it's not that big, but they got a lot of expression out of it. And taking some time to make a nice transition between the raw material and your subject matter so that they flow and make sense together. Those are important factors. And this is also in the relief category. The faces are really good proportion, well done, nicely carved. There were 2 areas where we thought maybe with the texture in the book, we thought if the lines had flowed a little more continuously, you would get more of the feeling of pages. And this dark shadow here, we thought maybe if that was blended down into the book a little more, that transition might have been nice. But I think one wise decision that they made was not to put too much detail in here to draw your eye away from the main subject matter. So we thought that that was well done. And with this piece, there's An interesting way of just composing it, you could tell it wasn't just thrown together. The weakness would have been in just some of the anatomical details. And this hand, especially the articulation between the thumb and the hand, you lose a sense of the palm and the thickness of it there. But, and the rest of it, though, is nicely composed. And this is just a really beautifully carved piece, very nice finish. The painting was really delicately handled and nicely presented. You can see how much work went into that. A good example, and here even, we were looking at how nice and smooth the finish was, and noticed that this wasn't so smooth, but it totally made sense that that is where the pollen is growing from. So that was actually a good choice.
Yes, on this piece here, it was very good. You hear louder? Okay, the buildings were somewhat haphazard, and they weren't, the perspective wasn't right. They were kind of going all over the place. I did like the snowflake, the falling snow and everything. It might have been a little bit better to have a little bit of snow on the ground at the time, but it's just beginning, I suppose. But the windows, if you look at the windows, they're different sizes. That's one of the things we looked at for this piece here on the relief.
There. And again, the overall effect is very good, but we would have liked to have seen this hand treated a little differently. There's a nice blow-up of it there. And people understand hands so well, even if it's just subconsciously. And sometimes it's not that they'll notice what's wrong, but if you did it differently, it would have even more impact. And just getting some of the positioning and perspective of the fingers probably would have helped this piece.
Yeah, if you look at the hand, the fingers are all the same length. They all come in. If you notice that when you fold your hand, your fingers are going to be different in a curve. That's one of the things I pick up from Pete Ortell out of New York on characters carving, to get the hands right. That eyes and hands really tell a story in the human figure.
This particular piece, when we first saw it, until we saw the title, it was a little confusing, because that fish, I believe it's depicted that there is a flame coming out of its mouth. If they had chosen colors that were more appropriate for a flame, where when you see a flame, the color might go from a yellow to ultimately that blue color. And I think it may have been a little easier to understand what they were portraying. This was basically a statement about what human beings are doing to the environment. And if you look down in the lower left-hand corner, you see an old tire, and you also see that this fish apparently is trying to escape the pollution. And I believe if they had changed the color and maybe looked specifically at what colors a flame would be, it would have been much easier, and it would have pulled it off even better. The actual carving itself, we thought was pretty solid, but sometimes you just have to look at the total piece and see, does it give us a feeling of any kind?
Yeah, here again on the relief, the perspective of the building is a little bit off. What we also saw, and you can see it by the photograph of it, that mountain in the background should have been further back. It was too far forward. It could almost been touching the background. And that's basically what, you know, what we see was the main thing they could have improved on that one. And the trees. The trees almost look like they're cones stacked upon each other. Pine trees vary a lot in their branches, and they could have broken that up a little bit.
On this piece, the eagle was fairly well done. The flow of the feathers was pretty good. You have to remember that an eagle, because it's a bird of prey, its eyes are going to be facing more forward than, let's say, something like a chicken or a pheasant, where their eyes, because they are the prey, they tend to look straight out, not totally, but more out. Whereas a bird of prey is a little more like a human being. They're going to need to be able to have a good depth perception. So what I think you will find, for us as judges, any piece, whether it's a snake or a frog or a human being, the eyes make the difference. And so if you're carving a human being and the eyes are wrong, we tend to kind of look away from that. Whereas if the eyes are right, that may carry your piece even further than it would if the eyes aren't. So we tend to, when we greet another human being, we tend to look into their eyes, most of us. And we tend to kind of look at whether it's a puppy or anything else, and when we see cute eyes, it brings out emotion. And so on this eagle, the eyes, one of them to me is a little low, and they could have been tipped in a little more so that they're looking forward a little more. This blue jay really captured the essence of a blue jay. Blue jays are really closely related to crows, and they tend to have that attitude. And this one had the attitude. I would say the only reason that this one may not have even done even better would have been the finish. If you work on a carving for 100 hours, the last 2 hours will make and break you. So if you don't take care of the final finish and the final wood, maybe it was the feet, maybe it was the eyes, and get them all cleaned up, it just doesn't push it to that next level. This one, the finish wasn't quite at the level of some of the best in show pieces, but it was very well done.
Yeah, and on that bird, if you go back, what we said is the body was a little wide on this one. It looked a little wide. And also, a lot of the birds we saw, the feet and the toenails were not touching what they were standing on. Also, the balance, it wasn't balanced for the weight of the birds. It didn't come in right.
This little kestrel was well painted, and well carved, but if you look at it, it's ready to fall off backwards. The center of balance, right in the center of where their toes are, should be pretty much close to where their shoulders are. And if you look, if you were to draw an imaginary line straight up, it barely is inside the chest. And that's one of the things that when you see a piece from a distance, that's one of the things that will strike you right away. Is it off balance? Does it flow? Does it create some kind of a feeling? And like I said, in this one, the glove, the bird, well done. If they had simply given it a little bit of movement forward, I think it would have been significantly better. This is a ringneck duck, and it was well done. The anatomy of it was decent, and the finish was very good. It was the strongest of all of the ducks that we had. There are times where a decoy with a flat bottom will hold its own against a full body of this duck. It's hard to pull off when you have a raised wing. You're talking about working on the underside and making it right, making sure that when you put it in an extreme pose like this, you have to do some research. And this person did. And it was well conceived, and the balance on this, if you look, if a duck, now this one was on a plexiglass rod, but if a duck is standing on one foot, you have to remember that 1 foot should be under the center line of the body. Because there isn't a person here that can stand without shifting their weight over that 1 foot. You cannot do it without somebody holding on to you. And so that center of gravity has to be right in the center of the body. That foot has to be under. This particular bird by itself was really strong. I feel like the interest may have been lessened by the sky. The sky was pretty blah, pretty generic. They could have made it a little more interesting. This particular person that carved this actually visited the Taj Mahal. And this is an East Indian bird. We had to Google it and look it up. They were really accurate with this bird. They really were. The actual branch that it's sitting on, the leaves were done in such a way that even the vein was in there. And very strong piece. Like I said, I've talked to the carver, and it probably would have been significantly stronger if they had made the sky a little more interesting. And I understand, we love bluebird days, but if the clouds had a little shadow under them, that would have made it significantly better.
On that one also, I have a tendency not to like just rectangular, square things. If that was uneven around the outside edges and some kind of a different form might have been a little bit more appealing.
This particular bird, if you're out in the gallery and you look at it, this artist really chose eyes that were a little lighter maybe than the norm. It made it better. It made it stronger. You look at that bird, and like I said, we tend to be drawn to the eyes. And that bird's, its expression, there were just so many things about it that were strong. Maybe the weakest point, and I suspect that they did a lot of research, the leaves looked a little bit bright and artificial. I think if they had been toned a little bit and maybe had a little more of an olive color, a wash to them, it would have made them pop even more. The branch on this, if you look at it, it goes from wood that has been exposed, the bark is gone, and it really added to this piece. We struggled with this, and I'll tell you why. Between this and the Best in Show, we spent a lot of time negotiating as to which piece was the strongest. My feeling was, this bird looks like it's dressed up and going to the prom. It doesn't have the movement in it that I would have liked, but like I said, it's dressed up, it's going to the prom. The orchids that are beside it are incredible. That bird is incredible. As I understand, it's made out of holly, which is an incredibly hard wood. And so they were able to pull this off with those long tail feathers. They are incredibly fragile. If you tried this with basswood, I don't know that it would have made it here. This piece was stunning. And like I said, this bird is a quetzal, which is, I believe, Central American. And I believe that the Incas would have used these feathers in their headdresses. And it was at least the Native Americans, if you will, from Central America. And gorgeous bird. Colors were incredible. You could look on the bottom, you could look on the top, side to side. It was really striking. They added a little bit, and I mean a little, you have to look close, which makes it more real, of glitter to this bird. It has a kind of glitter to it. The feathers, but around the eye, there's still a lot of glitter. Now, was that the reason we threw it out or moved it to second? No, it was up against an incredible piece.
Yeah, we had a lot of problem with the pyrography, and none of us really do too much of this, but we're looking at this, and it's kind of like, wow, this one's all over the place. I did talk to the person who made this, and actually this is a form of pyrography, which is kind of like a hodgepodge of things. I can't remember the name she said, but Zentangle, there you go. And we didn't know that at the time we looked at it, but very, very good detail, very good coloring. I can't say anything, really bad about it, other than we didn't know too much about it.
When we judged pyrography, we came to the conclusion after we judged this, that if we'd done it the day before or the day after, we may have come up with first, second, and third differently. It was that difficult. You had to really look close for errors. There weren't a lot. You look at this piece, and where the pyrography ends and the bowl of this plate begins is so consistent. It is. They changed the pattern so many times. The skill level of doing those curves is incredible. You know, I can draw a straight line with a wood burner. You start running those curves and make it consistent. That's another level, and that's what this was.
Are the white areas bleached? I think they call them gel pen. Gel pen.
With this piece, there's some real delicacy in the hair. You can kind of see that they went from really dark to really light, but had areas where there was such a nice, delicate transition to create that fluffiness of the feeling of hair. One thing with wood burning, I think that wood burning becomes much stronger when you use the full tonal range, from really dark to really light. And it's those subtleties of in between where a real special quality comes out. And here, another one, nice composition, well executed. If there's any area where we thought maybe it could have been handled a little differently was the size of the hands. Just in proportion to the face and the rest of the body, just a little large.
This particular piece, again, if there had been more interest in the background, it would have made it stronger. The problem that the other judges had, as well as myself, on the wings, the front, the leading edge, you can see that they kind of form an upside down V. Right there where it's called the primaries and meet the rest of the wing. And the trailing edge was also sharp. That just didn't quite work. If it had been more rounded, it would have been even stronger. The head on this ring-bill gull is incredible. This particular artist likes working with small pieces, small birds, and they are really good at bringing out the essence of that bird. So this was a very strong piece. It's just every piece is going to have something that you maybe like a little stronger.
Sometimes we have difficulty fitting things in a category, and this was in a category of chip carving on not a flat surface. People could argue that this is just a combination of flat surfaces. So you see, sometimes we run into a difficulty where something doesn't fit cleanly into a category. We do the best we can. And generally what we did is, if we could justify it into the category that the artist submitted it into, we would leave it there. But having said that, with relief carving, the execution and the precision of cuts becomes very important. And I don't think you'll find a bad cut on this thing. And it's not only that, but it's carved on the bottom, inside, everywhere. And also with a sense of composition to it. It wasn't just a hodgepodge. So we felt that this was really well done. And with the caricature and the level of detail in here and the personality that they managed to get out of that piece, we thought that this was excellently done. If I'm not mistaken, it's a spoon, so it's in that category. But this decorative detail really added quite a bit to it. Another one in the chip carving category, and what we thought was especially strong with this one, there's a number of joints where the wood is not, with several pieces of wood put together. And there are some really small, tiny cuts involved in chip carving. And yet, as they come across that joint, those cuts still come out really clean and consistent. And the degree of difficulty there would make that piece really quite remarkable.
Yes, and sometimes when we look at the chip carving, there were cuts within the cut. And I don't know how I would even do that. Just trying to get some of those things in there.
These are stink bugs. They're not my favorite living thing. Most of us avoid those if we possibly can. They were so well done. They really were. Now, I don't know if Brenda took the picture of the inside there. And if you look, you see a weevil on the right that's exposed, and down below, or excuse me, on the left, you see the centipede. Every one of these were incredibly well done. The finish on the stake bugs was scary real. I mean, they were painted well, the legs were solid. This piece sat on the best in show table for a while. So, if you make it to that final 10, there are a lot of things we found wrong with. That's the strong part. So this person, I'm not sure who the artist is, but they really did some research and did it well.
With this piece, we found the strong aspect of it was the actual insects themselves, really well carved with a lot of subtlety. We thought that the base and the context in which the carving was done might have been handled a little differently. With the previous piece, there was a cutoff, this is just cut off flat. But even on the previous photo to that, you can see, just there we go, just a little bit of unevenness to give it a natural organic feel. And the color and texture is also very natural and organic. But in the following piece, you can see it would have benefited from some of that subtlety. But the insects themselves were very well handled.
The monarch butterfly that you see there, they chose to do relief carving where the orange is versus the black. It just didn't look natural. If it had been a little thinner and smooth, and yes, they would have had to work on their painting, but it would have looked far more natural in that relief. It just kind of took away from that insect, that butterfly.
And my comment on it was like, would that many different kinds of insects congregate together on one piece? I didn't quite know if that's possible. I only see a bug here and there on a piece, and there was quite a few different species there.
This is so sad piece. When you walk into a gallery or walk into this, I arrived and looked at this for the first time, and there are some carvings, some pieces of art, whatever it is. It could be Mona Lisa, it could be American Gothic. They have a wow factor. And this one had a wow factor. Now, as a judge, sometimes the closer you get to the wow, the less wow is there. It didn't happen on this one. You can get right up on it. The expression on this goose, the closer you get, the more real it looks. And you know, in order to put this goose the way it was, that thing, it just fits. Christmas goose, it just screams it. And it's balanced. That foot that's up, it just brought it to life. Instead of being a stiff, regular carving that could be done really well, this one just moved. And it was really, really outstanding. It was one of those pieces that you see, and you know, after 2 years of not being here, I needed something that was happy. And this thing it just brings joy. It looks like it's just having a wonderful time, you know. So, like I said, the reason that this kind of rose above was that wow factor.
Yes, on this piece here, I made a comment that it looked like he had a little bit too much eggnog at the party, and he was kind of tipsy a little bit. And that brought me to, it was a fight between the Kessel and this Christmas goose. And it was up to me to make the deciding vote. One of the only times it was 2-1. And I was looking at it. One, the Kessel had to follow the rules. This one was a caricature. It could break the rules. But to me, because it had movement, that kind of did it for me. There were little things here and there on both carvings, but the movement for it did it on me.
With this mouse, there were other carvings where they would have just an individual little carving like this, and the mouse is certainly well done. But this would be a good example of a carving where the artistic elements, the decision about the composition and design was really made a big difference. And every carving can benefit from this. You'll see carvings and it's a good carving. This is a way to make a good carving better. That mouse could have been, you know, just on the base by itself, and it would have been a very good carving. But look at how much more impact it gets because of the overall artistic elements that they introduced into it.
On a 1 to 10, that mouse is a 10. On a 1 to 10, the base is about a 5. It's rough. It just needed better finish. But the overall impact of it carried that piece. But many times, as a carver, close your eyes. A friend of mine a long time ago told me, paint with your eyes, carve with your hands. And it didn't make sense initially. He said, close your eyes. Rub your hands over your piece. If it feels square and it shouldn't be, change it. If it feels rough, sand it. This base is rough. And I've talked to the carpenter, and they know. And they're probably going to change it and run it a little bit higher. But the overall concept of this piece was so strong. And I'm going to tell you, get up close to that mouse, and you're like, this thing's real. It's very strong.
When I seen this too, I would have liked to see more like a rotten fence post on the bottom instead of that square object. And also, I think we talked about it, that if the wheat had little fine hairs put in the outside, and like it normally has, it would have looked a little better also.
Well, yeah, and this carving was really quite extensive. It's carved from one piece, and that moose is fully three-dimensional, so they're having to carve all this with everything else in the way. A really remarkable job, and not a bad moose. Where we found some difficulty was in the treatment of the tree here. And again, these lines of branches, and we felt everything else was so organic that could have benefited from a more random placement of the branches.
This piece, the dog is carrying a duck, retrieving it back through the water, and you know how hard the dog is working in the water. If they had brought the wake of that water up onto that duck and then let it flow and make it look more like water, it would have carried this piece even further. The dog was really well done. The duck was really well done. The only place, it's hard to tell that dog is in water, because if you look off on the left of this photo, that water could be anything. I don't see waves, I don't see ripples. And if they had, like I said, put a wake in front of that duck and then let it flow down, the water would have been really, really strong. But that was the weakest part of this, I felt.
Another wood burning, sometimes just the artistic elements of itself become quite strong. It's a good wood burning, and there was lots of good wood burning, but they made some clever artistic decisions. The choice of the wood contrasting, you have the curly grain and the grain with the rays, just from a woodworking point of view, as a nice contrast, but letting the design, the whole movement of the design is this way, and then throwing a little element into the frame itself, and it was just a nice touch.
Most of us that live here in the Midwest are never going to see this turtle. This is pretty much a tropical turtle. The choice of the base on this really accentuated the carving, because this turtle is very spiky, and it would have been pretty well camouflaged in this kind of a base. And sometimes you want that base, and whatever the material, it could be a human carving, but you want them to look like they belong together. And this one it did. This one also sat on the best in show table. And for a while, we didn't pull it off right away. It was really, really solid.
And as we were looking around, especially at this base, I started seeing different forms in the base. I thought I saw a dog on one side, and it kind of lets your imagination go away. So I agree the base was very, very good choice.
Initially, I thought this was a northern pike. Well, those of us that have never caught a muskie, but we don't necessarily know what a muskie looks like. This represents a muskie. It's well done. The only weakness that I felt, the top of it is absolutely flat, and then it breaks. It's like there is a ridge. Now, on northerns, and I have a strong feeling on muskies, where the spine is, it would be slightly recessed, and then there would be some pumping. They're incredibly muscular fish. And so, if they had rounded that top just a little, it really does. It goes from a flat top, and there is a fairly severe break when it comes down on the sides. The mouth, the gill work, the eyes, they're all very strong. And when you are doing natural wood, you can't hide that when you make a mistake. If you paint it, there are ways you can cover that. You can't do that when it's natural. This was a very strong piece, not just the fish, the actual base that it's on. That you can tell that wood has been worked. It's been cleaned up. It has grooves in it so that it looks old. It looks like it's been in the water a long time.
And this was in human figures, good proportions. The anatomy is good, but also they took a little time to create little body language. You know, the kind of a juxtaposition. This arm is holding the sword this direction, but the eyes are looking this way, and you get kind of a spiral effect happening in the design. And it's not just from an artistic point of view, but what you communicate with body language. So it has the right kind of defiant body language for what the subject matter is portraying. And here is another piece, again with a totally different treatment. Another example of a piece that could have been in another category. We left it where the artist intended it to be. When you do something where you are exaggerating certain features, it has to be for effect. It can't be just a random distortion. And we felt that the distortions here actually worked well with the feeling that they were trying to create. And this piece, the especially strong aspect of it is the drapery. And not just for the carving, but also for the finish, creating that sense of luster where light would be reflecting off of the folds. Well done. If there was any difficulty, it would just be in the hands. Some of the subtleties in the articulation of the bones and the proportions. But it has a very strong presence.
I was impressed by how fine those fingers are. That top hand, if you really look at it, that would have been a real challenge to get it that thin. Those fingers were so fine. Yes, there were some minor things on the hand, but not much. It was, when you saw this, that, like Neil said, the clothing, the drapery that's on it, the folds seem very appropriate for the way that is standing.
And we often tell people to avoid a composition where it's just straight and square, except there's the odd occasion where it's entirely appropriate. And this would be an example. a coat of armor, you want that kind of straightforward presentation. But with just a little twist, the hands crossing over each other to give it a little bit of a more human touch. And a nice finish, just well done. And with this piece, the drapery wasn't quite as strong in this piece as the previous piece, but the storytelling here was very interesting. If there was any difficulty we found, again, with that hand, the hands are really difficult, so it's not a bad hand, but we felt that with a little more attention to some of the articulation in the wrist bones, it would have been even stronger. But as you walk up to that piece, the overall effect is very good. With this piece, a nice finish, you know, what happens with the eyes, as Randy had mentioned before, we're drawn to eyes. So as you're cutting in the iris to give the impression of the dark part of the eye, if you show the whole iris, it ends up giving the impression of shock or surprise. And in this case, I don't think that that's probably what they wanted. So if a little more attention had been on the actual incising of the iris and pupil, you would have got a slightly softer looking eye, and I think that they may have been happier with that effect.
Yeah, we also looked at the eyelids. There should be a more definite line where that top eyelid folds up underneath the brow there. That was, would have been a little better there if that was done better.
And this is another example of a piece where we didn't really know what category to be in. It ended up in mythical, and we thought, well, that should be stylized. But we understood eventually that it was from mythology. As a stylization, it was quite pleasant, but what I really appreciated was the subtlety of the hoofs. It wasn't just randomly chopped out. There was a nice flow to it, and then there was some nice subtle detail as well. And this was a piece that we had to take extra care when we were looking at it. Relief carvings clearly need special lighting to see them clearly, but this was also a piece that we had to move around in the light. The grain and the texture and color in the wood would make it difficult to see some of the detail. And normally that's a really bad flaw, except that the theme of a crucifix, it makes it somewhat appropriate. But when we especially got it in the right light, we could see that the figure was really well done. We had to nitpick to find the things, and so one of the judges realized that on the edge of each of the transverse piece of wood there wasn't the same texture, but that's how picky we had to get sometimes in order to find distinctions between pieces.
As Neil said, on the cross, they showed that this was a weathered cross. And so they carved to make the wood of the cross look like there was grain. But the thing that changed drastically was at the tip of the horizontal beam on the cross and the very top of the cross. That's so smooth that it's shining, and it was like, wait, this is a weathered cross, but at the end, that's where it fit. But like Neil said, literally, we had to hold this up and then tip it against the light, because when you look on Christ, he has ribs showing. cannot see them because of that grain of that wood and the color of that wood. It disappears. But when you get to see it in the right light, then all of a sudden there are details carved in there that are really incredible. This mouse, again, is about a 9 or a 10. The base is shiny. And you know what? Unless it's raining, wood's not shiny. And I've talked to the artist about this, and they're going to change the finish. They're going to change it because that's not a bad camera angle. That's how shiny that little stump is. That mouse is incredible. And the whole concept, I mean, that little piece of cheese in there is really well done. That whole thing is well done. Like I said, it was like, if you work on a piece for 100 hours, the last 2 hours will make or break it. So it's the finish.
Sometimes when you understand the context of a piece, it really helps. So this was a depiction of the very bad storm that happened in Cedar Rapids, and the kind of horror and distortion and distension that you feel in this piece would have totally reflected that tragedy. A lot of subtlety, just the articulation in the hands and the arms, it just had this gruesome quality to it. The expression on the face, you know, those just white eyes always have this kind of feeling of horror about them. We were having to look pretty hard to find anything to pick over on it, and one of the things that we felt, and you won't be able to see it unless you look really hard, is just a bit of glue around the teeth. But this piece, sometimes when you're composing something, it's asymmetries, things that you throw off, especially when you're trying to make a point. You wouldn't want to compose a statue of the Venus de Milo in this form, but because of the subject matter now, it becomes appropriate to have these kind of wild distensions. So it all worked together. A lot of good artistic choices made there. And again, some of them aren't just in the detail. It's this overall sense of design and composition that becomes very important.
When we were looking, we got a lot of questions afterwards. It's a cow. Why should it be in this category? But if you look at the muscles there on the front leg and the big sway in the back, that was not realistic. So very nicely done, very smooth, and good expression on the face. Otherwise, that was a very good cow.
This cow has attitude, and it shows. This deer would have probably done even better if they had worked on hand sanding with something that was stiff, because it was rippled on the legs because of the different hardness of this walnut grain. And you could tell that those legs should have been much more smooth. And when I say smooth, I'm not talking about how glossy the finish is. They should have run more straight all the way, and it rippled. It really did. The whole piece had some ripples. The flow of that piece is so good. It really is a wonderful piece of art. And I think if they were to work that and get rid of those ripples, then I think it would just move this up significantly.
Yes, at first I kind of looked, what the heck was going on with this piece? And you look at it and, oh, instead of tying a string around your finger, he tied his knot into a finger. And very nicely done. But it was kind of a wonder as what was going on there at first.
This piece was in the stylized category and thought it was just a really brilliant execution of a way to take a limb and make it square and yet still make it flow nicely and give you the feeling of something organic. Some of those transitions were just really pleasant, and the overall body language and the combination of that made it a very successful piece.
They pulled it off. This was a stylized bird. I believe if they had made the body wider, because both sides of it are so flat, if they had made that body more oval, where it comes in contact with the water, it would have been significantly stronger. Notice on the base, you can see there are ripples. They did a nice job with that. The only thing that just didn't seem to fit are those cattails. They are straight, they're vertical, there's just, everything else is rounded and flows in those cattails. They look like needles. I mean, they're just too straight. If they had been rounded, bent, showed some flow, it would have made this significantly different.
There. Sometimes in the finish, and this is a question of opinion, but for us as judges, we were all on the same page, and so many other judges I've talked to as well. A shiny finish, there's a few times when it's appropriate, but not very often. And we thought that this piece might have benefited from just a little bit less gloss. When you have something that's that glossy, the points of light sometimes distract from the forms, and you want to get the right balance there. From an execution, it's well done. It's all nicely formed, rounded. Like the idea of throwing a heart into the negative space. All those are good decisions. I would have liked to have seen it also with just maybe just a sheen instead of a gloss. This piece was in the instructor-assisted category, and for someone who would have taken a piece from as the instructor handed them until they actually finished it, it's remarkable. The degree of precision on the cuts, the very clean execution really made that piece stand out. And they made some nice artistic decisions in the base and the presentation, and all that really helped a lot.
You know, somebody taught Tiger Woods to play golf. Somebody taught this person how to carve. Sometimes you get better than the instructor. And this was one of those. This is really a nice piece. If you look at the braids, those spirals are hard to do. This took hours to pull this off. And the more you look around it, the more you see. That face had so much expression, and it was so cleanly done. Where the shirt meets the neck, now it's clean. And it wasn't always that way on every piece. So, congratulations to this one. This was well done.
And if you look on the neck, the grain of the wood is almost like it could have been almost painted on. It's very uniform, and around the neck there, it just, that kind of struck me.
This little kestrel has so much attitude. And it was also instructor-assisted. But as I talked to the artist, I found out they did this via the internet. And it was done in segments, and I think maybe approaching 60 different sessions of small amounts. The downside of this, and again, I talked to the artist, this particular piece has some barbed wire on it. The barbed wire is made of copper. And I tell people, if you're going to do anything with metal, whether it's metal legs, the barbed wire, metal leaves, I use automotive primer. I go to the Napa store, I buy automotive primer and spray it on, because this particular piece, if you look close, there are spots where that paint has broken loose, and you look at it, it's not barbed wire, it's copper. And that won't happen if you get the right primer, the right bonding agent, so that paint isn't going to break loose. Because the truth is, in shipping and handling, wire, like this artificial barbed wire, is going to move around. And if it does, you don't want it to do that. So, just those little things will make a huge difference. The wing on this bird that the kestrel had taken was accurate enough that I felt it was a house sparrow. And the artist said, yep, that's exactly what it was. So you can pull it off. If you can just carve a wing, a broken wing that this kestrel's holding on to, and I could recognize the species that it was holding on to, that says you did your research. And these are close-ups of where the copper is showing on that barbed wire.
This was in one of the categories, I believe, from a rough out, and you already have the composition and everything so that you're working. We felt that the treatment of the shoulder area on the horse could have been handled a little differently, but they did get a consistent kind of a bronze look finish. There you can tolerate a little more shininess. But I think if a little more attention to the anatomy of the horse would have helped improve it. And in this category, when you have a stylized house, there's already a tradition. A lot of people have done it in a certain way. So what really helps then is if you add a good set of artistic choices to the composition. And we thought it was really nice the way that the roots worked up in. You got a sense of a tree growing underneath, and it flowed, it was consistent, and yet still had an interesting look about it. And here I believe also instructor-assisted or rough up, my apologies. But the treatment of the paint and the finish, a difference in textures, those are all important things to do. And in this case, that really helped this piece along. With the painting, it's not just one color. And they're treating it differently even as they're fading a single color out. So those decisions create a little more subtlety and a little more power to the expression as well.
Yes, and if you see on the bottom, he's sick of winter, I want to play golf, but it looks like he is playing golf. And he has his mittens on, no detail in the hands. And isn't the ball supposed to be a bright orange color so you can find it in the snow?
And sometimes in a single category you have so many different styles. And this was in the caricature carving category. And it's not in the typical caricature carving style. So we do our best. It's difficult when you're comparing one style against another when they're both well done. But this did show a very interesting sense the distortions all added to the power of the expression and the feeling that they were trying to get. I thought it was also unique that they have some areas where the wood grain forms part of the presentation, and in other areas it's painted, and the juxtaposition works in this case. So a successful piece.
If you look close at this piece, it has a lot more expression than initially you think. It's fairly straight, but if you look at the face of the guy, he's looking up at the parrot that's sitting on his head. And then the parrot that's on top of that is looking up at the butterfly. And so it just had lots and lots of feeling to it. And it was well done. It just was. It was clean. It was just leaves you with a pleasant feeling.
And I just saw the mouse in the bottom of the beard. I didn't see that before. Yeah, this was a carving that was just done in plain wood. It has a nice movement to it. The chair is tipped. What I find out is in the very deep recesses, like under the armpit and underneath his knee and back in behind the chair, there were rough spots that could have been cleaned out a lot better. But otherwise, it had good form and bent wheels and had a lot of different things going on in this. I have a little bit to say about this one. When I first look at it, it's kind of hard to tell in the photo here, but if you look at her hair, it's supposed to have the moon glow or moonlight kind of off of it, and it was put in with a kind of a light white wash paint, and to me, I didn't like that for some reason. It just didn't hit me. Also, if you're doing a moon way out, it should be very sharp, and it was rounded, so it kind of resembled a banana instead of a sliver moon to me.
One area where this piece was quite strong, if you have a chance to look at the treatment of the blouse underneath there, just a very detailed design, but still organic fabric look feel to it. With this piece, one thing, degree of difficulty isn't always the thing that we will judge a piece by, but when we saw this piece, we knew right away who it was, and we know the difficulty of capturing the likeness. But it wasn't just that. It was very well carved, there's a certain surface treatment, and it works well, and it's consistent throughout. There are some of the movement of elements within the headdress. They're not just random, they help with the design and the flow of the piece, and just overall. Now, normally we don't encourage people to have a piece that has no finish on it and that has cracks in it, but sometimes, given your subject matter, that'll all work fine. And in this piece, they managed to make it work fine.
This piece is another one that really it's very expressive. And one of the things that I spotted pretty early on, now you have to remember, this is a very small piece. This piece is maybe 2.5 inches, if that. But look at where the toenails are and the coloration. That's tough to do when you're dealing with something that small. And like I said, this is another piece that just has a feeling to it. It just does. It's not just Turtle. Turtle's got his foot up, you know, he just has an attitude. And sometimes it's that attitude that catches us.
I think we were talking to somebody about it, and the head was kind of like made like it was a puppy dog that they had lost, and looking up, and it does have a kind of a puppy dog kind of look to it, which makes it more attractive. This was miniature class, and it was my pick for judge's choice. At first you say, it's a little crow or what, or a raven. It's actually a raven. But if you look at the fine detail, we had a magnifying on Randy's phone here, and we actually could see the detail with the magnification of it. The detail was just amazing, and it struck me emotionally as my pick.
With this piece, there's distortion in the face, but it's not accidental. When you create an impressionistic expression, sometimes you're going past what's realistic to create something that is even more powerful sometimes. And I really liked how some of the carving was done in the face that would kind of, it was impressionistic in style, but really well done. There are times when you can take what's real and tweak it a bit to even gain an extra oomph in your expression. And if there was any strength in that was where the really strong part was.
This betta was well carved, but unless I'm mistaken, every one of those fins are copper. That's the only way I could ever see that you could get the curls and the flow that they have. It was also a bit shiny. Yes, I know that the fish is underwater, but if you go snorkeling, fish don't shine. You're underwater, then there's no shine. Yeah, you bring them above water, and then because of the water on the fish, it's going to make them shine. But it would have been more pleasant if this didn't have that intense shine to it. And like I said, I feel like the vast majority of this fish was actually copper. The base on this piece we felt was one level. If it had had different levels to it, it would have been far more interesting. The rocks around the front were all one level. The step in the back is pretty much all one level. The tree behind the deer, literally, it just drops off. It just goes straight. From the roots, it goes straight down. If those roots had been kind of worked into where the water is, it would have been stronger.
Yeah, the water itself was the poured epoxy, and it had a little surface tension around the mouth of the deer drinking. If that could have been reworked a little bit and had little rings, rings coming away from it as it was ripples when it was drinking, and then recoated a little bit with just a paintbrush of that stuff, that might have come up with a better drinking, but it looked like it was sucking up into its nose.
When you first saw these, you just saw 3 or 4 little carving tools. And at first we looked at that one on the left, and we thought, why in the world does that have a little, it looked like a zip tie going through it. And we thought, is that a wood chip? Well then, duh, you read the tag and it goes AWC. And that's what those gouges form, is AWC. And they are miniatures. We picked it up and it was like, oh my goodness. Then you realize somebody's doing something different. And thinking outside the box sometimes is really fun. And that's what this was. This cedar waxwing was really in the running for being one of the best of any of them. The presentation, cedar waxwings are berry eaters, especially early in the spring when they're migrating north. And this one was clean, just the way the sitting was nice. The only weakness was probably the actual feet. They were okay, but there were things that could have been done maybe a little stronger. And like I said, the presentation, it's simple, doesn't have a wooden base under it. It has berries. The leaves may have been, out of context, because normally when I see cedar waxwings and they're really hard at it eating berries, it's early in the spring around here. There aren't a lot of leaves on any of the branches.
And we just want to showcase some of the youth carving. We want to encourage as much as possible to get a fresh crop of carvers here. These are very nicely done. A good flow in the animal, some interesting constructions in the house. And that's well done. Got a really nice, consistent, smooth on the shaft of the knife there, and put a little bit of shape into the handle. Well done fish. And I think just some compositional decisions made there too. Not bad for someone starting. The birds, I should let Randy talk about the birds.
The hummingbird, if they were going to put the nest in there, the nest is fairly accurate, but it's not going to be free hanging as though it's like a Baltimore Oriole. It's probably going to be down in the crotch of that branch. Hummingbirds use spider webs and lichens and little tiny grasses. They are so fine that it would need to be, you really can't see it here, but there's a gap underneath that hummingbird nest where the crotch of the two branches are. If they had put it down in there and just literally kind of carved it down so that it's part of that, it would have made it look a little more real. As a youth carver, this is awesome. It just is. The little puffin, to be honest, I wouldn't be able to help this person as much as their parent. That's Josh Newby's child. And so anything that I can critique, all they have to do is go upstairs or next door. They're gonna get a real pro. But that puffin is cute and it's well done.
There. Before we go to questions, I would like to say, we've talked about ribbon winners and best of show, but I would like to depart from the agenda and consider the best show. And because of all the help we've been getting, the volunteers, the displays, everyone involved, this has to be one of the best shows. So I want to thank everybody, and I hope that we have many more years ahead. Thank you.
As a first-time judge, no, I'm sorry, they do deserve applause. As a first-time judge, I realized how much work the volunteers put in here. And whether it's our photographer, but I'm telling you, the photos that we have on their website are incredible. Mark does an incredible job. And, Brenda is working, and everybody else. You come in here and as a rookie, you're a lot nervous, hoping that you can do the best you can. They relieve a lot of anxiety. And somebody said, oh, it must have been really tough doing the judging. It was only difficult because of the quality that the carvers that are here put out. That's why it's tough. It wasn't because of my two very good partners in this judging. They made it pleasant. And so, to them I thank, to the carvers I thank. I didn't have to look at things and set them aside right away. It was, you made it challenging for us to decide who was better. So, thank you.
Well, as a longtime member, helper, board member, whatever, this is my first judging experience for something this quality-wise, and we had a lot of fun. Like I said, I think there was only one time that we had a 2-to-1 vote on anything in the show. Everything was pretty much agreeable. We discussed it a lot, looked at every carving of the thing, and then slowly had to say, pick out the ones till we got to the final ones. Very, very nicely done, but I've been here a long time, done a lot of stuff, and I'm more experienced, so I'm basically the answer man for anybody here. Ask a question, I probably know the answer, or I'll fake it.
you.